Hey, hello, folks. Dustin Zarni here, Democratic Elections Commissioner in Onondaga County. I'm coming live to you from Texas. I'm actually on a family vacation planned along with the spring break here, but I wanted to do a quick update. My only content this week will be this Commissioner in a Car podcast talking about New York redistricting. And maybe it won't be so quick because it's pretty complicated about what's going on right now, but let me try to give you as much information as possible about everything we know going forward for New York redistricting on the congressional maps. Some background, just because I think it's important for those of you who haven't been following all along. I think it's important to know what the steps of these processes have been throughout the last several years, actually throughout the last decade, because this story starts all the way back in 2014. It starts back in 2010. Let's go back to that. The last redistricting round in New York was chaotic and disorderly. It resulted in maps in 2012 that were drawn very, very late in the cycle, drawn by the legislatures. At that point, there was a Republican Senate and a Democratic Assembly and a Democratic governor under Andrew Cuomo, and the round of that redistricting was so chaotic that it got all parties to agree to a new method to do redistricting in New York, that they would actually amend the Constitution of New York and come up with a different method of, instead of just having the legislature be the sole drawers of the maps, they would have what they were calling an independent redistricting commission. Now, many activists went to court and said that it can't be called independent, and they were right in the ballot language, but I'm not going to get too far into that. But what it did was they created a constitutional amendment that the voters passed in 2014 to have a 12-member redistricting commission that 10-member redistricting commission that was called the New York State Independent Redistricting Commission. But the term independent is a little different. Those of you who have followed my podcast and my quest for citizen-led independent redistricting in Syracuse and Onondaga County, you can see that this is totally different. These are political appointees by the legislative leaders and from both parties onto the commission, and it's equally balanced. 6 Democrats, 6 Republicans. You have to have 7 votes to get a map out, and that was seen as a way to bridge the divide of the legislative chambers that were, the Senate was Republican and the Assembly was Democrat back at the time of this constitutional amendment passing in 2014. However, something changed in this balance of power, so to speak, where Democrats were able to take control of the Senate in 2018, having a unified Democratic governor. And unified is in air quotes for those of you who are watching or listening to the podcast as opposed to watching, but a unified Democratic government in 2018, and it's been that way ever since. And not only has it been that way, both the Assembly and Senate Democratic majorities have expanded to the point where they are veto-proof or beyond the 2/3 measure. And that is very important because part of the rules of the Independent Redistricting Commission it has to deal with, have different rules for whether a chamber is, whether the legislative body is, has one party in one body and one party in the other, or both parties being the same in control of both bodies. So let's get into that. So what are the rules of the New York State Independent Redistricting Commission? Well, they were supposed to meet, come up with consensus maps, give those to the legislature, and then the legislature would have a chance to either approve or deny those maps. And if they denied those maps, they could then draw their own maps. Again, a big difference than many other independent redistricting commissions, where the legislative chambers here wrote into the law that they could draw their own maps, as opposed to, say, the Syracuse Independent Redistricting Commission, that if for some reason the Common Council rejected the maps, it had to go back to the Syracuse Independent Redistricting Commission. And what we contend is the same with the Redistricting Commission with the county, that the legislature cannot draw those maps, that they have to be drawn by the commission itself, no matter how many times they're rejected. So this is a big sticking point. So what it did also said, though, is for the legislature to approve any map, it would be a simple majority of the legislature if the chambers were controlled by different parties. But since the chambers are controlled by the same party, you actually need a 2/3 vote to approve any map, not reject any map, to approve any map that comes from the New York State IRC. So this sets up where we are today. I'm not going to get to where we are today for a second, because I do want to recap what happened in 2022. In 2022, the New York State IRC was unable to come up with consensus maps. They gave two rounds, or first round of map, where they gave two sets of maps, one from the Republicans, one from the Democrats, which the legislature rejected all of those. And then the process was supposed to, that the New York State IRC would then meet again, come up with another round of maps, and then the legislature could decide to keep or reject those. They did not meet. And so when they did not meet, the legislature decided that because they were unable to get a second set of maps out of the New York State IRC, they had the ability to draw the maps on their own, bypassing that second map, second map part, because the New York State IRC would not meet, the Republicans would not meet with the Democrats to come up with other maps, and thus they were running out of time. So then the legislature drew their own maps. Those maps were eventually taken to court, and the court held that in the Senate and in the assembly ones were not taken to court at first. It was just the Senate and the congressional ones were taken to court, and then those ones were ruled by a judge in Saratoga, or was it? No, Steuben County, to be unconstitutional. And his remedy was, since he waited until June or so to rule those unconstitutional, or May, his remedy was to have a special master draw the maps for the Senate and the Congress. Now, the assembly maps were eventually taken to court as well. At first, it was just the Senate and the congressional maps. But the assembly maps were eventually taken to court. But because it was taken to court so late, they allowed the assembly maps to stand. And then eventually they had to be redrawn by the New York State IRC after the 2022 election. Now, when those maps were ruled unconstitutional for the Senate and congressional in 2022, the judge appointed a special master to draw the maps and ordered a special August primary that we had to hold, and that special master drew the maps. However, part of the judge's order, or lacking from the judge's order, was that these maps drawn by the special master would be there for 10 years for the rest of the redistricting. In fact, it didn't say anything about that in there. And then in the preceding time after that, after 2022, the assembly maps were taken to court, and the court ruled that the New York State IRC had to meet and draw new assembly maps for the assembly, and that the maps weren't unconstitutional, but the process had not met and had a second round of map drawing, and because of that, the process that was put in place by the voters in 2014 wasn't followed, and so they had to draw new assembly maps and did, and so that is that is what happened with the assembly maps. The reason I point that out is because we're now in a quandary with the congressional maps. Now, the Senate maps and the congressional maps were drawn by the special master. However, Democrats, New York State Democrats, took the congressional maps back to court, saying that those maps were only valid for the 2 years from 2022 to 2044. There was nothing in the order for it being the entire time, and that the New York State IRC should have to redraw or at least put in a second set of maps for the congressional districts, because they only put in the first set of maps and they never put in the second set of maps back in 2022, and that was part of the reason why the court threw out the congressional and Senate lines, was because of the process was not followed. Now, they also threw out the congressional lines drawn by the legislature at that point to be a partisan gerrymander, and we'll get to that in a second. I know there's a lot of intro here, but I wanted to be as thorough as possible. So now, after 2022, Democrats take the congressional maps back to court, and they win a big ruling late last year that said that the congressional maps have to be redrawn, and that the New York State IRC must submit a second set of maps and let the process play forward. Now, they didn't say that the legislature has to agree to those maps, only that the New York State IRC, by February 28th, had to submit a second set of congressional maps. You may be asking what happened with the Senate maps. Well, the Senate maps were never brought to court. The Democrats seemed to like the lines on the Senate map that came out of the special master. The Republicans never brought that to court. So those Senate maps are in place until 2030, or until 2032. And of course, the assembly maps were redrawn by the New York State IRC and passed by the legislature. So those are okay till 2032. So now we still have the congressional maps. Well, this brings us to where we are today. Last week, the New York State IRC met and came up with a bipartisan agreement for maps. A 9-to-1 vote of the 10-member body. That's something that I don't think a lot of people thought would happen. But the maps themselves have been widely criticized. So they submitted them on February 15th to the legislature. And now the process is that the legislature has to have a vote on those maps, and they have to approve them. They have to approve them by a 2/3 vote, because the Democrats have the assembly chamber and the Democrats have the Senate chamber. So now that provision that was put into the law, that if there's a same party in the chamber, they have to get to a 2/3 vote to approve the maps. And that's important, because Democrats hold a 2/3 advantage in both the Assembly and the Senate. And now the Republicans have come out very much in favor of this bipartisan map, despite Brandon Williams whining on Facebook and Twitter. The New York State GOP has come out there and said that they're for these maps, and they're urging their adoption. So that gets them part of the way to the 2/3, but not, Democrats have a 2/3 advantage in both chambers. So that's only 1/3 of the way to getting the votes that they need. So that means that a significant number of Democrats still have to vote for these maps for them to become law. Right now, the legislative chambers are on vacation. They're on the same vacation that I'm on, the spring break vacation that many school children are on. Is that week they already planned to take off. Their staff has already planned to take off. They're not in control of the timing of when the New York State IRC gives the maps. And I actually don't blame that for them. That doesn't mean that there's not discussions being had. They're off. They don't have any. They don't have any reason to come back to Albany. So the earliest they'll come back to Albany is Monday the 27th. That's next Monday. At some point, either Monday or Tuesday, they're going to have a vote. And so I will, and I need to preface that I'm not taking a position on whether they should vote for the map or against the map. That's not my call. I haven't had the time to sit down and really go into this. I do think that there's a lot of problems with the map in some areas. There's a lot of good things with the map in other areas. But my position was for them to finish this process in a way that won't cause another primary in New York. And I think that can still be done no matter which way the legislature votes. And I'll explain that in a second. So let me roll out the two scenarios happening in next week. So the first scenario is that the legislature votes by 2/3 to accept the maps. If that happens, the governor signs it. The maps that were drawn by the New York State IRC will go into effect immediately, and the petition process that's supposed to start on Tuesday the 28th will go into effect. And maybe the congressional lines aren't finished in the sense of the BOE process until the end of the week or in the middle of the next week, but people know what towns that they can walk in. They can get lists for that, so on and so forth. They know what the lines are. We'll be able to go through this year without and the next until 2032 without any more changes, and people will have the data they need. However, let's say the legislature fails to get the 2/3 majority needed to pass the maps. Again, it's not 2/3 to reject. They need 2/3 of both chambers to accept the maps. So if either chamber refuses it, it then goes to the legislature to draw new maps. Now, that's where a lot of weird scenarios will come into play. In 2012, when the maps were delayed by weeks past the deadline, they decided to have the petition period, have the number of signatures once the maps were signed into law. And that is a possibility this time. Let's say the legislature decides to redraw the maps. It takes a couple more weeks. We're a couple weeks past the start of petitions. For the congressional lines alone, they can say, okay, you have 3 weeks to gather petitions, and it's at, 500 signatures or 700 signatures instead of the 1,250 signatures that you have to get. That is a possibility, and I think the more likely scenario that if the legislature decides to draw the maps, then having an August primary, at least on the legislature end, they will come up with a solution that will allow us to continue on with the June primary. The question is if the legislature draws maps that a court decides are gerrymandered, what happens then? Well, there's several different changes from 2022 that are going to go into place. The biggest change is that there won't be any forum shopping this time around. The Republicans can't go to Steuben County and ask a surrogate courts judge acting as a Supreme Court judge or whatever scenario that's out there to get into this. They'll have to go to one of the major districts, probably to Albany County, and have a judge with a lot more experience that can rule on this a lot quicker than what happened a few years back. But even in that scenario, more than likely, but if the legislature passes the maps even very quickly, and the lawsuit is brought very quickly, we're talking months of expert witnesses and all of that. It's going to take some time. So even if that happens, the question is, will this result in an August primary? And I think it's more likely the scenario will be that whatever maps the legislature is drawn will be allowed to go forward for this cycle and then be redrawn in the next cycle if that's the case. That's probably what should have happened 2 years ago. But, there was this ruling by Steuben County to go to the special master map, and mainly because the process wasn't followed. The process is going to be followed this time, because part of the process is whether the legislature rejects the map or accepts the map, and that is part of the process. And having a legislature redraw the map is also part of the process. So my gut, and again, I'm not a legal analyst, I've been involved in redistricting, been watching what happened in other states. More than likely, if the Democrats in the legislature draw a map and it is challenged, it will stand for this cycle and maybe be changed for next cycle. That being said, the steps, the process for the New York State IRC have been put into place. The question is whether the court will decide to say, well, this map is bad, we're going to go back to the special master map, or this map is bad, legislature, you have to draw another map. That, I think, is the question that will be answered in 2026 if the court finds, and I think that's a big if, the court finds that the Democrats put in a gerrymander that is not passing the constitutional language that is in place. Now, there's a lot of ways the legislature can draw the maps, still benefit Democrats on paper, but it not be a constitutional gerrymander. There is a lot of ways for that to happen, because partisan gerrymanders, as you may remember, are not subject to Supreme Court rulings. That's only racial gerrymandering. And there's still a lot of questions up in the air. So can we have an August primary? I think it's possible. If the legislature redraws the map and the court says that the map is so bad that it can't stand for this cycle, that it must be replaced during this election year, they can say we're going back to the special master map, and then at that point, everybody's that might be like May or June, and it's too late to change it for June, so they'll move the primary to August for Congress. That is still a possibility. I think that's the worst case scenario. And I have no idea, what scenario will come in, because I don't know what the legislature is going to do. It's up to the legislature now. They either have to accept or reject the maps, and if they reject the maps, they have to draw their own maps, and then we have to see what those maps look like. It's going to be, so there's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of, up in the air. The maps that were provided by the New York State IRC is not determinative. They may not be the map. Now, I want to take a little time in this podcast, and then I'm going to get back to my vacation, to address the ridiculous conspiracy theories that are out there about the New York 22 seat. And unfortunately, this was fueled by Dave Wasserman in a tweet, and and Brandon Williams has picked up on this, and unfortunately some left-leaning activists have picked up on this as well. It is ridiculous to believe that the New York State IRC had the John Mannion, Sarah Clee Hood primary in mind when they were drawing those lines. And let me explain why that is ridiculous. Because it goes back to what the New York State IRC is made up of and how they are composed. For one, they're composed between the Democrats and Republicans, equal split. So when the maps went back to them, I've always theorized that the question was going to be how much of a compromise are the Republicans willing to accept to get a bipartisan vote out of it. And in that scenario, Democrats are going to be looking to make some districts better. Republicans are going to be looking to make some of their own districts better, and they come up with a compromise. And in the central New York area, you had two competing interests. You had the Democrats wanting to have New York 22 better, and the Republicans wanting to have New York 19 better. And New York 19 is held by Molinaro. New York 22 is held by Brandon Williams. Everybody believes that Brandon Williams is more vulnerable as a congressional candidate than Molinaro is. And so I believe the compromise was never about the primary election. I mean, silly to even think about that. Because we'll explain what happened. Part of Oneida County was excised out of the district to bring in part of Cayuga County and Cortland County. And the conspiracy theory is that the New York State IRC did this to give John Mannion a leg up because he's stronger in Cayuga County, where he used to represent in the state Senate district, and Sarah Lee Hood, his main challenger, is stronger in Oneida County because that's where she won a lot of her votes in the primary 2 years ago against Fran Cano. But let me explain why that is a silly thing to think that was the primary motivation. Because if the motivation was for Democrats to make New York 22 better for Democrats, then they had to include the city of Auburn into it. And what they did was they excised the northern part of Oneida. And Republicans had an equal amount of motivation to make New York 19 better for Molinaro. And so getting the northern part of Oneida into Molinaro's district gave him more Republican voters. And getting the city of Auburn into the New York 22 gave the Democrats motivation to get more Democratic voters for the general election in there. And there simply was no other way, no other place to go to get Democratic general election voters for New York 22. Onondaga County is wholly incorporated in New York 22. It's a blue county. And all the counties around, with the exception of Cayuga, are pretty red counties. And Cayuga is red, but not as red as Oneida. And getting the top strip of Cortland is, again, red, more Republican than Democratic, but less than the northern part of Oneida. So the natural thing is, if this horse trading is going on in the New York State IRC, it had nothing to do with the primary, and it had everything to do with the general election. And while there is some perceived benefit to John Mannion, nobody knows. All of Madison County is still in the district. That was a Sarah Lee stronghold. A good portion of Oneida County in the Utica area is in the district. Again, that is perceived in this theory as a Sarah Lee stronghold. And also, we have to remember that these are two different candidates. John Mannion is different than Fran Cano. Sarah Lee is a different candidate than she was 2 years ago, in the sense of she has a lot more money and more name recognition. To believe that the primary patterns from 2 years ago are going to hold from the primary patterns of this year is just silly. And especially since, the southern portion of, or the northern portion of Cortland County, nobody's represented. That's up for grabs. So these silly conspiracy theories may play well on Twitter, but when you look at the facts, they don't bear out. Had nothing to do with the primary, probably a lot to do with the general, probably part of the horse trade to make the Republican district in New York 19 a little bit better for Molinaro, and while sacrificing Brandon Williams, because a deal needed to be made, and it wasn't going to be as good for the Republicans as it was before. That's my theory. That's the end of this podcast. I'm going to get back to my vacation. I am on vacation this week, so no more content for me this week. But starting next week, I'll be trying to get back on my regular schedule of a commissioner in car, a Zoom with Zarni, and a weekly wonk each week. But until then, village elections are happening in March in Fayetteville, Minoa, and Manlius. My next week's commissioner in car will be talking about village elections. And what's at stake, including some weird propositions that are on the ballot. And then, my Zoom with Zarni next week, my guest has not been yet identified, but it will be soon. And then my weekly walk, at some point, I will finally get to my DustinZarni.com YouTube. I have the stats together for that, but I just haven't had a chance to write it. So that's all we got. Early voting by mail is available for villages. Go to onvote.net and to get your application. And also the April 2nd primary, the presidential primary, the zombie primary is on. And we'll talk a little bit more about that after we get by the March 4th Super Tuesday elections, and we'll get an idea of really who's in the primary for New York. All right. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day. And I'm going to enjoy this beautiful sun. Sorry, Central New York. I know it's a little cold up there right now. I'm going to go out and enjoy this beautiful sun with my family. Bye-bye.